Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. In this story, the most important warning is not cheating. It is contempt. When somebody who promised to love you starts speaking as if they are above you, stop trying to win them back with effort, gifts, or patience. Contempt does not soften because you work harder. It usually grows in the dark, and by the time it speaks out loud, it has already been living in the room for a long time. If you have ever watched someone hide disrespect behind calm words, this story is going to stay with you. Before we get into it, like this video, subscribe, and share with someone who knows what quiet betrayal looks like, because this one starts with a sentence no husband ever forgets. On our 12th anniversary, my wife set her fork down beside a plate of blackened catfish and told me, in the calmest voice I'd ever heard from her, "I have been disgusted by you since our first night." A trumpet player in the corner of that Bronzeville restaurant was halfway through an old standard. Glasses clinked. Somebody laughed near the bar. I looked at Camille, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, everything lined up. The way she leaned away in bed, the way she corrected me in front of the waiters, the way every good thing I did somehow came back bent. I smiled before I said a single word. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind that comes when a locked door finally swings open, and you realize the room behind has been empty the whole time. Camille mistook it for weakness. She always mistook my quiet for surrender. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin and glanced toward the window, where sleet was dragging itself sideways under the streetlights. "You do that," she said. "You smile when something is wrong, like that fixes it." I reached for my water, took one sip, and said, "No, that smile means I finally believe you." We had been seated near the back, beneath a framed photograph of a jazz quartet from the 70s. The owner knew us well enough to send over bread, putting on anniversaries. 12 years. Enough time to build habits that looked like love from across the room. Camille wore a dark green dress with a square neckline and little gold hoops. Her nails were the color of plum skin. She looked polished, expensive, and deliberate. I still had the dry crack in my thumb from replacing a compressor that morning. She hated when my hands looked like evidence of work. She said it made even a nice dinner feel temporary. "What made you say that tonight?" I asked. I did not raise my voice. That bothered her more than anger would have. She shifted in her chair and stared at me like I was forcing her into honesty. "Because I am tired," she said. "Tired of pretending I am not repelled by how small you think. By the shop, by the grease under your nails, by that house with your little careful systems." I nodded once. I could have made a scene right there. I could have let 12 years of humiliation stand up in my chest and knock plates over. I chose not to because public anger would have fed her story about me. We drove home through South Side streets washed silver by dirty snow. The heater in my truck rattled on every stoplight. Camille kept checking her phone with the screen tilted away from me, a habit so old I used to pretend I did not notice it. We passed the corner store, where the red open sign always blinked one letter out. We passed the church where my mother had sung alto until arthritis curled her fingers. We passed a bus shelter with 3 teenagers huddled inside in puffy coats. I did not speak. Camille finally said, "You are being dramatic." I kept my eyes on Cottage Grove and answered, "No, I am being done." Our house sat on a quiet block in Chatham, a brick bungalow with a narrow porch and a creaking side gate. I bought it 2 years before I met Camille. She used to call it solid. Later, she called it cramped. I kept screws, washers, and odd little parts in peppermint tins on shelves in the basement. I labeled leftovers with masking tape and dates. I folded bills into a tray by the door. Camille said my systems made the house feel like an office. What she never understood was that I grew up with things disappearing. Money, electricity. Man, order was how I kept fear from turning into weather. That night, she did not follow me upstairs. She took her overnight bag from the hall closet, though she had not packed one before dinner, which meant it had already been waiting. She said she was staying with her cousin in Hyde Park to get breathing room. I almost laughed. The breathing room had a car charger, a silk scarf, and a second pair of heels in it. She rolled the suitcase across hardwood like she had rehearsed the sound. At the door, she paused, maybe expecting me to beg, maybe wanting the satisfaction of refusal. I leaned against the banister and said, "Take what is yours. Leave what is mine." She left without answering. The next morning, I opened Tate Appliance Repair at 7:30 sharp. Same as always. The cold had turned the lock stubborn, and my breath hung in front of me while I worked the key. My shop sat between a barber shop and a tax service office with fading posters in the window. Inside, the place smelled like dust, warm metal, and old coffee. I had 3 jobs on the board: a church freezer in Auburn Gresham, a washer on 79th, and a radio restoration for a retired music teacher who refused to throw anything away. I tied on my apron, checked my pencil stub in my shirt pocket, and realized my hands were steady. I met Camille 13 years earlier at a scholarship dinner in a church basement on King Drive. I had donated labor to repair the church refrigerator after it quit the week before the event. She was helping the planning committee because her aunt chaired it, and she stood out immediately, not just because she was beautiful, though she was. It was the way she moved through a crowded room like she had a ruler in her spine. She asked me if I could fix a sticking banquet hall door while people were still arriving. I did. She smiled and said, "You make difficult things look simple." That sentence kept me warm longer than it should have. Back then, her sharpness looked like discipline. Her standards looked like ambition. She steamed napkins before dinner parties, lined up shoes heel to heel in the closet, and sent thank-you cards in her own handwriting. She worked for a luxury staging company, dressing empty homes so rich people could imagine themselves inside them. She could walk into a bare room and make it look like somebody generous lived there. I repaired what broke. She curated what other people wished for. I thought we fit because she admired my steadiness, and I admired her polish. What I did not know was that admiration can turn into appetite without ever becoming respect. On our wedding night, we stayed at a hotel near the river because Camille said she did not want the first night of our marriage to happen in a house that still smelled like my workbench. I remember the room being too warm and the drapes too heavy. I remember her sitting at the edge of the bed with her back straight, earrings still on, staring at the carpet pattern like she was waiting for instructions from somewhere else. I thought she was nervous. I thought maybe weddings exhausted people in strange ways. She let me kiss her forehead. She turned off the lamp. Then she said she had a headache and slept close to the edge. The next morning she laughed it off so easily I felt childish for even noticing. "I was worn out," she said while tying her robe. Do not make one awkward night into a story. So I did what I had done all my life. I told myself a cleaner version. When she flinched from my work clothes, I called her sensitive to smells. When she avoided my hand in public, I called her private. When she praised other husbands for being worldly, I called it a harmless comparison. Men can build whole religions around not wanting to feel foolish. I know, because I preached one to myself for more than a decade. By noon that first day after the anniversary dinner, I bought a black receipt book from the office supply store and started writing dates, times, and facts. No speeches, no guesses, just facts. 11:43 p.m., overnight bag already packed. 12:18 a.m., left house after anniversary dinner. 6:02 a.m., no message except, "I need more time." I was not building a revenge file. I was building a rail for my mind. Shame makes memory slippery. I knew that from watching my father drink away arguments and later swear entire evenings had happened differently. I needed a version of events that could not be gaslit into smoke. 3 days later, Camille came home with pastries from a bakery she never liked and a tone so gentle it almost sounded kind. "I know I was harsh," she said. "I was angry. You know how I get it." She placed a box of croissants on the counter and took off her gloves finger by finger. I watched her move through our kitchen, like a guest trying to remember where the silverware lived. "Do I asked. Her mouth tightened. "Do not be a careful voice with me." Then her phone buzzed on the island. She flipped it over so fast her bracelet knocked against the granite. I could have grabbed the phone. A lot of men would have. I could have demanded a passcode, called her names, turned suspicion into theater. Instead, I made my second choice. I decided I would not gather proof in any way that would make me hate myself later. I had spent too long being treated like a smaller man. I was not going to become one to catch her. You should answer that, I said. Camille looked surprised, then suspicious. It is work. I nodded. Then work must be anxious. She walked into the pantry to take the call, not realizing the pantry door never closed all the way. I did not hear much. Just pieces. No, not tonight. A pause. Because he is here. Another pause, softer this time. I said I would handle it. Then silence. The pantry light cut a yellow line through the dark hallway. When she came back out, she was already irritated, which was always her shield when she felt exposed. You were standing there like a security guard, she said. In my own kitchen, I answered. She rolled her eyes and left the room. I wrote the time in my receipt book and went downstairs to the basement, where the humming furnace sounded more honest than anything above it. A week after the anniversary dinner, I met with a family attorney named Denise Hallbrook in an office above a pharmacy in Beverly. She wore a navy sweater, square glasses, and an expression that told me she had seen love rot in every shape. I brought bank statements, mortgage papers, shop records, and the receipt book. Denise skimmed, asked precise questions, and never once looked impressed by my restraint. You need to separate income now, she said. Not as punishment, as protection. She told me not to leave the house, not to make threats, not to rely on verbal agreements. Contempt plus money, she said, tapping the folder, is where people get reckless. I changed the direct deposit for my business income that same afternoon. Tate Appliance Repair had always been mine, but I had been lazy about where the money landed because marriage made me sentimental and tired in equal measure. I opened a new account with only my name on it. I canceled 2 authorized users on company cards. I took photographs of tools, inventory, the safe in the basement, and the old 1968 Zenith radio I had been restoring for 6 months. It felt ugly. Necessary things often do. I drove back to the shop with my jaw aching from clenching and bought a burnt coffee from the corner store I never trusted. People noticed something was off before I said a word. Mr. Leon from the barber shop next door stepped outside while I was unloading a box microwave from my van. He was in his 60s, still lying his own beer with surgeon's patients, and had known me long enough to leave questions half open. Are you all right? He asked. The clippers inside his shop buzzed like angry bees. I shrugged. Working. He nodded like that was not an answer. When a person tells you exactly how they feel about you, he said, looking down the block, the only mistake is calling confusion. Then he went back inside without asking for details. Camille became unusually attentive for a few days, which would have fooled me once. She asked if I wanted fish stew on Thursday. She folded towels she never touched. She even came by the shop with lunch in a paper bag and kissed my cheek in the doorway while 2 customers waited. The performance was for witnesses, not me. Later that afternoon, she asked a question so casual, it almost deserved applause. When does your yearly vendor rebate check come in? She said, while reorganizing the pens on my desk. I kept my face blank. End of the quarter, usually. She smiled. Good. We should talk about investing smarter. I started looking at our finances with mechanic's eye, not the emotion of it, the pattern. 2 payments to a company called North Loop Interiors, which I assumed were for Camille's staging side work. A hotel charge in Milwaukee on a weekend. She told me she was at a design expo in Oak Brook. Several rideshare receipts between our neighborhood and a high-rise in the West Loop around midnight. None of it was one smoking gun. Together, it formed a shape. I sat at the kitchen table under the weak yellow light and felt something embarrassing settle over me. Not rage. Recognition. I had been editing evidence for years. My sister Rochelle came by on a Sunday after church with a foil pan of macaroni and cheese and the blunt tenderness of somebody who loves you enough to be annoying. She was a school counselor on the West Side and had a habit of taking off her earrings before saying anything serious. She listened while I told her only the facts I could prove. When I finished, she rubbed her forehead and asked, "Do you want to be right, or do you want to be free?" I knew what she meant. Public righteousness can chain you to the very person who hurt you. "Free," I said. She nodded, then stopped waiting for confession. The first time I saw Camille with him, it was at a coffee shop in Hyde Park with fog windows and little potted herbs on the sill. I had finished a service call on a broken dishwasher near the university and stopped in for tea because the cold was scraping my teeth. Camille sat at the back with a man in a camel coat. He was dark-skinned, clean-shaven, broad to the shoulders, the kind of man who smiled with his whole face because he expected rooms to receive him well. His hand was not on hers. Exactly. It rested a breath away, close enough to promise memory. She was leaning toward him. I did not storm over. That was the third choice. Every nerve in me wanted the drama of certainty, wanted to ask, right there between the pastry case and the sugar station, whether contempt had a first and last name now. Instead, I stood with my cup cooling in my hand and watched the expression I had been begging for at home appear on Camille's face without effort. She looked loose, lit from inside. I'm interested. I had not seen her look that way with me in years. I stepped back before she noticed me, went outside into the wind off the lake, and wrote the time down in the receipt book. A week later, I learned his name by accident and designed in equal parts. Camille left her tablet on the living room sofa while she was in the shower. It was our household tablet, the one we use for grocery orders and streaming old movies, synced to the family email because she had set up that way 2 Christmases before. A calendar notification slid across the screen. Lunch with Preston, 1:30, Green Street. Another followed. Confirmed condo walkthrough. I stood there looking at the bright white letters while water ran through the pipes upstairs. I did not touch the device beyond what appeared in plain sight. I did not have to. Preston Wells was a commercial real estate broker with polished headshots all over his company website and a habit of being photographed in expensive sneakers. He had a wife, according to the article I found, and twin boys in matching blazers in one family image from a charity gala. I stared at those pictures longer than I should have. Something about the symmetry of other people's lives can make your own feel less personal and more cruel. Camille was not sneaking off with a lonely stranger. She had selected a man who already lived in compartments. That told me this was not confusion. It was an arrangement. I asked Camille that night, as evenly as I could, whether she was seeing someone. Not accusing, asking. She stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a wine glass she had not used. That was another thing about her. She cleaned when cornered, as if wiping surfaces could thin the air. "No," she said without turning around. "I am seeing the result of being married to a man who cannot imagine a world larger than his block." I looked at the back of her neck, at the little gold chain resting there, and felt a strange calm. That is not an answer. She set the glass down harder than necessary. Then ask a better question. There are moments in marriage when the biggest pain is not what the other person did. It is a sudden inventory of how many times you protected them from the truth about themselves. Camille had always spoken with a cut in her tone when she wanted to feel superior. I used to call it stress. When she mocked the men at my shop as lifers, I called it frustration. When she told me she hated the smell of my jackets and asked me to undress in the laundry room after work, I told myself she just liked cleanliness. But disgust does not arrive all at once. It leaves fingerprints years before it says its own name. Denise referred me to a forensic accountant because 2 checks from our joint account had been routed through Camille's staging business into a deposit for a condo unit in the West Loop. Not our condo. A condo. The accountant, a neat young man named Warren, sat across from me with spreadsheets and said, "This looks like an asset transfer in anticipation of separation." That sentence took a second to land. I had been thinking in emotional terms. Affair, humiliation, rejection. Camille had apparently been thinking in square footage and future keys. She was not just leaving me in theory. She was building her next life with money that passed through my hands first. I cried in my van outside a tire shop on 71st Street after that meeting. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of crying that feels like your body is wringing out a cloth nobody else knows is soaked. A city bus hissed to a stop across from me. Somebody somewhere was grilling onions, and the smell came through the vents. My father used to say a man knows he is in real pain when ordinary smells start sounding like memories. I cried because I had mistaken endurance for intimacy. I cried because I had loved Camille in practical verbs. Paid, fixed, drove, stayed. None of them had made her kinder. When I got home that evening, the vanity table I built for Camille 10 years earlier was half cleared out. It was walnut handmade, with a hidden velvet-lined drawer behind the mirror for jewelry. She did not trust leaving in plain sight. I built it after she once mentioned, in passing, that her grandmother had owned a dressing table with curved legs and a perfume tray. It took me 3 weekends and a small burn on my wrist from rushing the stain. For years, she used it mostly as a place to stack unopened mail. Now half the drawers were empty. The hidden compartment had been cleaned out completely. That hurt in a stupidly specific way. I asked her about the condo 2 nights later. I did not bluff. I did not tell her how much I knew. I simply said, "Are you making a property move without me?" She went still in the middle of taking earrings off. "Why would you ask that?" Her face was blank, but her fingers moved too fast. "Because money left our accounts for something that does not belong to this household." She turned, crossed her arms, and leaned against the dresser. "You act like everything I touch is criminal." I almost laughed because that sentence belonged to guilt, not innocence. "Who is Preston Wells?" I asked. That is when her eyes changed. She did not answer question. She attacked the questioner. "You have been spying on me," she said, voice rising. "You, of all people, want to talk about betrayal? Living in your little bunker, shutting the world out, expecting gratitude because you pay the gas bill on time." I let her spend herself. It was one of the few useful things I learned in repair work. Sometimes you let the machine run until the bad noise shows itself clearly. When she finally paused, breathing hard, I said, "So there's a Preston." She looked away first. I did not say that, but the room had already said it for her. Our church anniversary brunch came 2 Sundays later, and I made another choice that could have gone differently. Camille wore cream and pearls and laughed at the right places, while the fellowship hall filled with fried chicken, sweet tea, and women in hats the size of weather systems. She touched my arm twice in public. She introduced me to a young couple as the man who can fix anything. I could have embarrassed her in that room. I had enough by then to at least rip the mask off. Instead, I spooned potato salad onto my plate, sat beside my mother's old choir friend, and kept my dignity where Camille could not decorate it. After brunch, I went straight to the house and gathered every important document I could think of: deed, tax returns, business licenses, insurance records, the title to my truck, receipts for equipment purchased before the marriage. My father's old lockbox was in the basement under a shelf of extension cords, and I carried it upstairs with both hands like I was bringing a body to the surface. I stored copies in a safe deposit box the next morning. It felt drastic, but I had finally understood something simple. Once contempt loses control of the story, it often goes after the facts. Camille was served at her office on a Tuesday at 11:20 in the morning. Denise had warned me it would feel ugly no matter how necessary it was. She was right. Camille called before the process server's car had probably cleared the block. "At my office?" she hissed. "You had papers brought to my office?" I was in the shop replacing a heating element. "I did not choose the time," I said. "Do not lie to me," she snapped. In the background, I could hear muffled voices, and one of her co-workers asking whether she was all right. "You wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said. "I wanted a record." She came home early that day, furious in a way I had not seen since the year our furnace died during an ice storm, and I told her we could not afford the designer replacement she wanted. She dropped her purse on the dining room table and stared at me like I had become vulgar overnight. "You think this makes you strong?" she said. "Dragging lawyers into private pain?" I shut my toolbox and looked at her. This stopped being private when you started planning another address with shared money. Her lips parted. There was again that quick surprise when my quiet arrived, carrying information instead of apology. Then she told the truth in pieces, which is the ugliest way truth usually comes. Preston had been around off and on for almost 2 years. Off and on meant whenever she felt seen, which was apparently whenever a man with sharp coat and a larger vocabulary for luxury said her instincts were expensive. The condo was not what I think. They were considering opportunities. The anniversary dinner outburst, she claimed, was because she was tired of being the villain in a life that had bored her from the beginning. You are good on paper, she said. You are exhausted in real life. I laughed then once, because the cruelty was almost childish. So when you said you were disgusted since our first night, I asked, what did that mean? Camille looked toward the window, as if the weather might rescue her from precision. It meant I knew too early that I had married safely instead of desire, she said quietly. You were kind. You were decent. And I hated how relieved everybody was that I chose you, like I had finally made the responsible decision. I stood very still. That is not disgusting to me, I said. That is resentment at your own choice. She folded her arms tighter. Maybe, but I still had to live with it. No, I said. You chose to. She moved out the following week to a furnished apartment in the West Loop for space, though by then both of us knew whose space it was near. Watching her take boxes from our bedroom was like seeing a stage set dismantled after the audience leaves. She took the ivory lamp she said made her look better in the mirror. She took framed prints I never liked. She left the vanity table, which felt less like mercy and more like an insult. On the kitchen counter, she forgot a grocery list written in her neat script. Lemons, sparkling water, stain remover, batteries. Ordinary handwriting is cruel after extraordinary betrayal. The consequences did not fall out of the sky in one dramatic afternoon. They came by schedule. First, her business partner stopped returning calls after Denise subpoenaed. Financial records connected to Camille's staging account. Then the condo deal stalled once the source of funds was questioned. Then Preston's wife, Monique, called me from a number I did not know and said only, I am sorry you are in this too. Her voice was composed in the frightening way of someone who has already cried somewhere private. We talked for 12 minutes. No revenge plotting. No alliance. Just two strangers comparing the shape of the same wreck from different sidewalks. I kept working because work is what grief looks like when it puts on boots. In March, I repaired an ancient freezer in the basement of New Hope Baptist while the women upstairs rehearsed Easter songs. In April, I fixed a dryer for a retired postal clerk who insisted on feeding me pound cake before I left. In May, I restored that 1968 Zenith radio and listened to static turn into music one patient adjustment at a time. Customers kept saying I looked thinner. Mr. Leon at the barber shop said I was finally standing all the way up. Pain changes posture before it changes face. That much, at least, was true. Camille, meanwhile, kept trying to control the moral version of events after she had lost the practical one. I heard from mutual friends that she described me as cold, controlling, obsessed with accounts and records. She said I had weaponized order. That phrase got back to me through a woman from church who pretended she was not delivering gossip, while very clearly delivering gossip. I wanted to defend myself to everyone at once. I wanted to hold up the receipt book, the condo records, the years of belittling, and say, here, read this, and tell me who was strangling whom. Instead, I let the facts do their slow work and save my breath for court filings. Summer arrived heavy and noisy. Kids ran through hydrant spray at the end of the block. Ice cream truck music drifted through the evenings thin as memory. I still slept on my side of the bed for the first month after Camille left, leaving the other side untouched like a museum exhibit of stupidity. One hot night, unable to stay in my own house, I drove to the lakefront and sat on a bench near the South Shore while freight trains moved in the distance. I realized I had been trying to earn tenderness from a woman who treated tenderness like debt. That was my flaw, not loving her, overstaying where love was unwelcome. Preston did not turn out to be the grand exit Camille imagined. I know that because I saw her one rainy Thursday standing outside a building downtown, alone, makeup streaked to the corners, waiting under the awning while rideshare cars splashed past. She had called me earlier that day from an unknown number. "My car is in the shop," she said. "I need a ride from the station." I could have said yes out of habit. I almost did. Then I remembered the anniversary table, the condo deposit, the pantry phone call, the years I spent translating contempt into stress. "I will send you money for a cab," I said. "I am not your pickup anymore." The divorce took 11 months from filing to final signatures. 11 months of disclosures, meetings, careful statements, and the strange intimacy of dividing a life into categories. Furniture, jewelry, retirement, debt. The house remained mine because I bought it before the marriage and the records were clear, though I had to offset other things fairly. Denise earned every dollar I paid her. Camille and I sat across from each other in mediation rooms with fake plants and stale coffee and learned how small even a long marriage looks once lawyers put it into numbered lines. I hated that process. I was grateful for it too. The only time Camille cried in front of me was during mediation in November, almost a year after the anniversary dinner. The issue was not romance. It was the vanity table. She said she wanted it because it had been built for her. I said I wanted it because I had made it with my hands in a season when I still believed devotion could be shaped into furniture. The mediator looked exhausted. Camille pressed a tissue to her nose and said, "You are always sentimental about objects." For once I did not soften. "No," I said, "I am accurate about labor." I kept the table. It remains one of the few decisions from that year that feels clean. A month after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Camille at a diner near 87th after an early supply run. It was one of those narrow places with cracked vinyl booths, weak coffee, and a waitress who called every man baby whether she liked him or not. Camille looked thinner, sharper around the eyes, elegant in a brittle way. She asked if she could sit. I said yes because the legal war was over and curiosity is its own bad habit. We talked about nothing for a minute. Weather, work, her aunt's blood pressure. Then she stared at the sugar caddy and said, "You were the most real thing in my life." That was part of the problem. I let that sit between us with the smell of bacon and bleach. "No," I said after a while. "Reality was a problem for you. I was just where it kept finding you." She gave a sad little smile, almost grateful to be spoken plainly. Maybe that is true. She told me Preston was gone. The condo never happened. And her freelance work had thinned out because too many people no longer trusted her with shared budgets. I did not gloat. Consequences had already done their work without my help. When the waitress brought the check, I paid only for my coffee. Camille noticed. That mattered more than a speech. These days, the house feels like mine again. The masking tape labels are still in the fridge. The peppermint tins still line the basement shelf. Mr. Leon's barbershop radio, the one that crackled on AM for 6 months, now plays clear beside my workbench because I finally had time to fix it properly. Sometimes I pass a restaurant where Camille told me she had been disgusted since our first night, and I think about that smile I gave her. She thought it meant I would swallow one more insult and keep begging to be chosen. What it really meant was that I had stopped auditioning for a role in my own life. What changed this story was not one dramatic confrontation. It was a receipt book, the lawyer's office above the pharmacy, the choice not to explode in the coffee shop, and even that moment when he sent cab money instead of becoming her rescue plan again. Boundaries rarely look heroic while you are living them. They look quiet, repetitive, and sometimes cold. But when contempt has been living in the room for years, quiet action is often the only thing that keeps grief from turning into self-betrayal. If this story hit you because it felt real, the receipt book, the condo, the diner, all the small choices that changed everything, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more original stories about love, betrayal, and self-respect told the way life really unfolds. The end.